There's been an absolute deluge of Fire Emblem and tactics-inspired indie RPGs coming out recently, so you kind of have to have something special going on to stand out in the crowd. And today, I'm going to show you one that I think is doing just that. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my coverage of upcoming and brand new Fire Emblem or tactics-inspired strategy RPGs, such as the topic of today's video, Gales of Nayeli, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Also, if you'd like to financially support the channel, you can check out my Patreon and my YouTube memberships. Links to those will be in the description as well. So what is the topic of the day? Well, we mentioned it already. It's Gales of Nayeli, an interesting little Fire Emblem-inspired strategy RPG by Blind Coco Studios, a friend of the channel who some of you may have seen around, especially if you are hanging out during my live streams or otherwise paying attention to the comments. Gales of Nayeli has a demo that is currently out on Steam. The full release has not yet happened, but from what I understand, development is progressing smoothly. So if you'd like to check out the demo based on anything that you see in the video today, that link will also be in the description. I highly encourage you to go do so because I have a lot of good things to say about this game. A few critiques, some things that aren't quite to my taste as well, but that's pretty much any game, so we'll talk about all of that. So what is the idea behind Gales of Nayeli? It is a Fire Emblem-inspired strategy RPG, very, very apparently. The first look you have at it will definitely scream Fire Emblem to you, especially more old-school classic-style Fire Emblem like the Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance era, which I love to see, as always. However, the number one thing that makes it stand out, it will be very apparent as soon as you begin looking at the game. This is because Gales of Nayeli draws direct inspiration from the First Nations peoples of Canada, from whom Blind Coco themselves, the game director, draws direct descent from. This means that a lot of your more standard enemies and story beats, character designs, weapons, things of that nature are going to draw very heavily on the culture of First Nations people, which is obviously something that we haven't really seen before in the Fire Emblem space, which has a lot more Japanese and medieval European influence as we've seen over the course of the series. Now, functionally, in terms of gameplay mechanics, this hasn't made a huge difference. My understanding of Gales of Nayeli built very quickly off of my knowledge of the classic Fire Emblem games, but visually and story-wise, it has been a very refreshing difference. Instead of basic enemy spear soldiers, you've got these little, literally called critters, running around wearing leaf costumes that smack you with sticks, and you have spirit wolves instead of normal mages that can attack you in melee with their fangs, or actually summon spirit fangs to attack you from a distance. Your characters themselves oftentimes are wielding wooden spears, or basic tomahawk axes, or guns. That's an interesting one. We'll talk about that a little bit further into the video. But overall, there is a very clear design influence here that draws direct inspiration from those indigenous peoples of Canada, and I really do enjoy that. It's really nice to see that there's actually something different going on here compared to the normal setting. So that's one of the big positives that I really enjoy about Gales. However, there's a lot mechanically that I really enjoy here as well. However, there's a lot mechanically and from a sort of like visual design and sound design standpoint that I enjoy as well. First of all the sprite animation is absolutely beautiful. There's really nothing I love more than seeing a well-animated Fire Emblem or tactics style game in action, especially Fire Emblem games, you know, cutting away to a battle scene and having some really quick, snappy, but nice animations go off, especially if you get a crit and you get some sort of different special added effect on your attack, seeing what different spell animations you have, how different characters run into and out of battle. It's always one of my favorite things about these games, and Gales of Nayeli does not disappoint in that regard. Over the course of the 4, I believe, stages in the demo, you get a wide variety of different types of enemy characters, as well as characters and classes of your own to play around with, and they've all been very fun to watch in action. In terms of sound design, I do really love all of the different menu effects, hit sounds, different XP gain sound effects, or characters dying sound effects, different musical strings. All have been really enjoyable to listen to. Now, unfortunately, I have not been as much of a fan of the voice acting that's in the game. It's not fully voiced. Usually you'll get selecting a character and moving them lines, and then occasionally a crit voice line or a level up line, things of that nature. And I know this is really more of just a me thing because I don't ever really need or want voice acting in my tactics or strategy games, to be perfectly honest. When it's executed well, like in Tactics Ogre Reborn, it's perfectly fine, even very enjoyable, but most of the time I would prefer game sound and OST to any sort of voice acting. So this could just be more of a me thing, but I definitely was not a huge fan of just the quick lines that would happen when moving a character or having crits or other, I'm kind of low HP and a little bit worried about my health lines. Like, none of that stuff really resonates with me. But again, that's more of a me thing than an actual knock against the game. Now, the biggest mark in favor of Gales, however, is its mechanical design. And after 2.5 runs through the demo, I can say I've sunk my teeth fairly far into what is on offer. The main idea is classic Fire Emblem, but with a much greater focus on weapon effectiveness and skills, terrain effects, and really leaning into what a character is good and bad at and knowing where their place is on the battlefield. Every character has a suite of different skills and combat arts that they're able to utilize, and it's pretty easy to get into what a character is able to do. Everything is laid out on their stats screen where you can see exactly what it is that they have going on and what they have at their disposal, and the combat arts screen is very easy to read where you can see every attack that you have and every effect that it is going to apply if you were to use it in battle. This is very important to keep in mind, as at least on Veteran, it was very, very apparent that I needed to make smart use of combat arts in specific situations if I wanted to successfully navigate a fight without potentially losing a character. This is actually something that was addressed by Blind Coco themselves in Discord messages with me, where they said that a few of these enemies are actually going to get tuned for the full release or maybe a future demo of the game, but as it stands, like, there was this fairy in the first map that I absolutely needed to go wind sweep with, specifically Nayeli's wooden spear, to be able to effectively kill the fairy without it blowing me up. Due to its actual magic resistance, the wind spear that Nayeli gets that does magical damage would not have effectively gotten the kill, so there was one major attack with one specific weapon that I needed to utilize to safely navigate that encounter. Now, to me, that can definitely be interesting, but if it gets too overbearing too quickly, I can absolutely see how it would become a problem, and that seems to be something that the studio themselves is aware of and will be tweaking for the full release of the game. The fact, however, that that system exists and they're willing to engage with that level of mechanical depth, I think speaks very well for the future of the title as characters level up, promote, get new skills, get new weapons, new types of enemies who have their own weapons and skills show up. There should be a lot of variety there, and I'm very excited to see how that's going to shake out. Speaking of variety, the different classes that are on offer should feel fairly familiar to you. Nayeli is a spear fighter who has both a wooden spear for melee fighting and a wind spear, think of things like Leaf's Light Brand in Thracia 776, for ranged attacks that do magic damage. Your own playable avatar has a fairly minor role in the story from what I've seen thus far, which I do very much appreciate, but is customizable at the start of the game. You're able to select a sword fighter, a bow fighter, a mage, etc., etc. For my 2 runs that I've completed, I first played a bow fighter, an archer, which was very interesting, and then my second time through I chose a sword fighter that made things way easier to handle, just having another frontline fighter. Not to say that the archer was bad, it was actually quite useful to have in a number of scenarios, but there were times where just having an extra body with a sword to throw at the front line was very, very nice. You also then have your classic dual-wielding rogues. Your healer is actually a flying fairy, which is a pretty interesting little twist on the normal cleric idea that also has magical attacks of its own with their own weapon effectiveness. You'll get an axe fighter who seems to kind of be the Jagan of the game in the second mission. And then near the end, you'll find a more typical armor knight, another sword fighter, a healer with, again, a gun, a mage, a lot of different things going on, and it seems pretty quick that you'll be able to get a bunch of different characters with different skill sets to utilize. Where things get interesting is when you realize just how specialized a lot of these characters' different roles can be. Let's look at our rogue here. Very, very low damage, and not the dodgiest around, but a lot of abilities that are going to lean very heavily into crit as she levels. So you have a scenario where you can maybe stand on a tile where you do get extra evade, maybe you're fighting enemies that aren't particularly accurate, a little bit squishy, get a couple of crits to trigger, and boom, you're off to the races. Combine that with the fact that every knife that she has actually has the brave effect, so you're typically looking at 4 attacks per, and those 1 or 2 damage hits could very easily start turning into dead enemies left, right, and center, which is a lot of fun. Having a clear through line where a character starts off weak, but you can very obviously see how you're going to be able to build into them to make them a monster, is a sort of dynamic character growth scenario that I do very much appreciate, and is something that is kind of lacking in some of those old school Fire Emblem games that we otherwise love so much, right? Like if you have a mercenary, and especially before Sacred Stones, they can only promote into a hero, you generally know what their path is going to be. They don't have any skills, they have 2 weapon types. Once you figure out who has the better stats of maybe the 2 or 3 mercenaries you're going to be able to recruit over the course of the game, you tend to know which is the one that you're going to be using anytime you run that game. With anything that has any sort of build crafting in it, like the more recent Fire Emblems such as Engage, or potentially things like Gales of Nayeli or other indie titles that are coming out, you have a lot more replay value and a lot more discussion can be had around how a character can perform based on those different decisions that you're able to make as a player, which I absolutely adore. As mentioned, there's a big focus on different effectiveness. Different magic tomes have very different enemy types that they are more or less effective against. There's also a very strong focus on enemies that have more or less magic resistance and defense, meaning that it's very important to have a well-rounded party that can deal with those different types of resistances, but also to have characters like Nayeli herself who can deal in both. Different terrain effects actually seem like they could be pretty impactful. Take these leaves, for example. They'll give you your standard extra evade, defense, but also starting your turn on one will actually give you more move. So there's an sort of implication here that rather than just choosing terrain for its defensive capabilities, you want to be able to choose it for how you're going to be able to advance down the board over the course of subsequent turns, encouraging you to pay attention to what type of terrain is around you and position not just for defense, but for mobility and planning for future turns, which is awesome. As far as the effects of different skills and combat arts are concerned, there's already a huge variety on display. We're talking like, hey, this deals extra damage to bug-type enemies and also gives you a massive boost to your crit on our Axe Fighter, or hey, Nayeli herself has the wind sweep effect, just making it so an enemy can't counterattack her when she uses this attack, but she also can't double up. There's a ton of that going on from the very beginning of the game, and it makes me very excited to see what's going to come in future missions once the full release is out. Also, considering how much of a penchant Blind Coco has for interesting little kind of fiddly mechanics from my conversations with them, I can imagine there's going to be a lot of fun stuff going on there. Now, for all of the mechanical strength, quality of OST, pixel graphics, animation, sound design, I do have some quibbles about the title thus far that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. We'll get into that now. As always, this is part just personal preference, part just friendly feedback and critique, because I do know Blind Coco. I do want this game to succeed, so I'm not here to hurt any feelings or be overly negative, but these are things that stood out to me that I think are worth mentioning. Some of the character art can be a little hit or miss sometimes. I like all of the designs, but there's certain poses and certain characters that don't feel as strong as others, and given how sensitive people can be to things like art style and character design, as we've seen in discussion of some of the other indie titles that I've been covering on the channel recently, I know that's something that people may wind up bringing up and potentially be a turnoff for them for the game. I do really enjoy the actual designs of all the characters, but sometimes there's a little bit of a mismatch between different character portraits. I imagine that some of the art that was done is older, some of it is newer. I actually know for a fact that the character avatar art is being worked on and updated. So it's kind of the nature of a long-form dev cycle indie title, is there's going to be different assets that maybe fall out of sync with what the more updated stuff is. So I'm expecting that there will probably be some changes that are done to that moving forward. My second quibble is that I really haven't felt super engaged by the story or the characters yet. There's been hints and pieces here and there that are intriguing, and I imagine as the cast expands and we learn more of the full plot that's going to be going into the events of Gales of Nayeli, I will get more engaged. I know story and character interaction is actually a big focus of the studio from what I've discussed with them, and the cast that you get in the very final mission of the demo did immediately spike more interest for me. But as it stands right now, I've definitely been looking at Gales more from a mechanical gameplay standpoint than a story and character interaction standpoint. If you are more in the camp of the latter in terms of what interests you in games, I still encourage you to check it out for yourself. Of course, you should always get your hands on and actually look at things with your own eyes rather than just taking discussion and criticism from someone doing a video about it. But if that is something that you are more interested in, you may, like me, not have as much to grab onto. And I do think that there's going to be a lot more going forward in the story that's going to be more grabbing. All told, at the end of the day, there's a reason that I've played just the demo of Gales of Nayeli 2.5 times not just in preparation for this video, but because I've just been enjoying it. Messing around with different character avatars, learning more about the synergies of different combat arts and skills, actually seeing what play and wiggle room there is in using different characters in different roles on the maps that are available, and feeling how the difficulties fairly smoothly evolving over the 4 missions that are in the demo really make me feel very confident about the future of Gales of Nayeli. It is absolutely one that I'm going to be checking out on release. I'm extremely excited to see just how it feels to get in there and play, and how much replayability there's going to be, because that's one of the standout things for that older era of Fire Emblem games to me. While there's a ton of great things going on with more modern releases like Engage and Three Houses, there's a lot of bloat and a lot to kind of chew through if you want to get multiple playthroughs in. And you tend to, because of all the depth of character building and different potential story paths or supports you can get. But there's something about the clean, crisp, smooth nature of that older era, the Super Nintendo era, the GBA era especially, that makes subsequent playthroughs feel so good and snappy to get through. And I'm getting that feeling from Gales of Nayeli. Again, 2.5 runs through just the demo, and I'm not bored in the slightest. I highly encourage you to check this one out. Keep it on your radar. I will absolutely be covering any and all news about it. If there is anything to discuss, you'll learn about it here. Thank you to Blind Coco for being part of the community and discussing the game with me. It's been an absolute pleasure to check out your work. I'm very excited to see what else you guys have going forward. For now, though, I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you to all of the channel supporters. You've been seeing their names go by on the right side of the screen. Without you, it would be far harder to keep this channel going. And if you're interested in helping out directly, financially, with the channel, then again, you can look at those Patreon and YouTube membership links in the description. With all that said, I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.